Why? They have given billions of dollars, among other things, to Ivy League campuses. Mm-hmm. When campuses like Columbia accept millions of dollars in donation from Qatar, why is that not about the Qatar lobby? Why don't we hear about that? Because the Qataris seem not to be in the inherited imagination of people as a guiding hand and as a disproportionately visible minority. But you could do this, I mean, much more impressive in terms of donations to American lobbying entities is, I mean, like, how much have the Saudis paid in lobbying in recent years?
Why does this question upset you? I'm curious.
No, it doesn't upset me at all.
Okay.
But I tell you what it does do is it worries me. And the reason it worries me is because, as I say, I see people falling into a very dangerous rut. And I know too much history, not enough, I mean, we always can know more. I know too much history not to recognize something that's happening at the moment on this question. It's a very, very strange thing when people with not very much knowledge of a situation start to pretend to be wildly knowledgeable about it. And that's really what I've seen in the last year in particular in the US, on the right as well as on the left.
This was actually a very simple question for you, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, it's not that simple. It's actually a very complicated question.
But here's what I was asking you. So I'm having a conversation.
But there is no simple question in relation.
Douglas Murray issues a stark warning. Europe is unraveling faster than anticipated. In this compelling discourse, he delves into the factors accelerating the continent's decline, urging immediate attention to the unfolding crisis.
The history of Jews in banking is very similar to the history of my own people in banking, the Scots. Why did the Scots, like the Jews, always overperform in banking wherever they arrived? Because they were from very high trust, tightly knit communities, where if you lent and you didn't repay the loan, there was a social price to pay. That's how basically after Adam Smith, that's why Scots and banking was so good, because the Presbyterian society had a social cost to pay if things like, for instance, a loan were not repaid. You would not be able to remain in the community having been dishonest.
Is it pure embarrassment? Is it embarrassment, or is it more like...
it's also ethos and ethics. It's definitely also ethos and ethics.
Got it.
I mean, if you have a community in which, for instance, I'm not saying there is any such community, but if there was a community in which lying was totally acceptable,
right,
for instance, you would find it hard to have a mortgage system.
Sure.
So I think it's partly that. I mean, the history of the Jews in Europe is also partly to do with that, the existence in the lending markets.
Okay.
And that came about in part from, as I say, a high trust within a small community. So it's bits of that. I'm not at all concerned about having this discussion, except that I worry about things going into it for this reason, which is I know the trope that this leads into, and that worries me. You see, I think that any time when a society is febrile, and maybe we are especially febrile at the moment because we're living through this second dark age. So I say the first dark age was the one where we didn't have access to information in the Middle Ages. And the second dark age is this one that we're currently in, where we have access to too much information. Mm. And people find it hard to sieve. As you mentioned, you've got 4 kids, you run a successful business and so on. You've not got time to look into everything. In this situation, I think that we are disproportionately likely to be looking for omni-explanations. And I have certainly worried in the last year about people falling into this particular trench. And it's one thing to say, I'm asking the question, and I'm perfectly willing to discuss it and debate it. Of course, we're doing that right now. But I also want to know why. Why is this back as a subject? Why do I see people online talking about Talmud and suddenly becoming... suddenly becoming experts in the Talmud, and they say things like, I've been doing my research. You haven't picked up a book. Come on. Yeah, you've been reading the commentaries. I mean, you do have to be rather suspicious about some of the places people...
Murray draws a cheeky parallel between Jewish and Scottish banking prowess. It's all about tight-knit communities and the fear of social exile for fiscal foe par, apparently. But beware, we're trudging through the second dark age, where armchair scholars armed with Google become instant Talmudic experts. Murray's eyebrows practically levitate as he ponders why this particular can of worms is being reopened, serving as our canary in the cognitive coal mine.
Fall into. In the same way that, look, if you just asked me about the Freemasons, I would be kind of, I wonder why we're talking about Freemasons.
I just talked about it last week with this guy that was a guest of ours. Carlson, right?
Randall Carlson.
Randall Carlson. And he was a 32nd degree Freemason, and my drill sergeant in the military was a 32nd Freemason. And we talked about it 2 weeks ago.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, it was actually interesting.
It's not that interesting. What was the famous phrase on Freemasonry? It's a bronze key that opens a silver lock and a golden door that opens the room into which there's nothing.
So you're not interested by it for the fact that there's nothing to it.
There's nothing to it.
But one could say we've had, 13 presidents that were former Freemasons?
Oh, God, look what I've led you into now.
Yeah,
Jesus,
you're doing
I should
it
not
to,
have
why are
done
you
to look
doing
at
this
you.
to me now? So
God, you're easy to lead.
Douglas Murray opens with a stark assessment. Europe is not gradually slipping into decline, it's plunging headfirst. He highlights how the continent's foundational pillars, from political institutions to societal norms, are weakening at an alarming rate. What was once considered slow-moving change has accelerated into full-blown crisis mode. Murray points to the rise in internal discord, unaddressed migration challenges, and the steady erosion of national identity. These aren't distant warnings, they're unfolding in real time, visible in cities across France, Germany, Sweden, and beyond. From political instability to cultural fragmentation, the warning signs are no longer subtle. They're front and center, and Murray argues they can't be ignored any longer.
The world has recognized the Holocaust, that it happened, okay? 100-plus countries, including Germany. You got reparations. You got all this other stuff.
It'd be rather alarming if Germany hadn't recognized it.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
But they even paid for it. So it's not like, they went one up. They're like, not only yes, but we'll also pay our debt because of XYZ, right? But if there's anybody that knows about genocides, if anybody knows about genocides, it would have to be the Jewish community, right, with the Holocaust.
And the Armenians and others.
The Armenians prior to the Jewish community, 2.25 million, whatever. They have 1.5 million Armenians. You got, I think it's 400,000 Greeks and 250,000 Assyrians.
And isn't it amazing that that's still a political issue?
It is, but believe it or not, Joe Biden is the first one that recognized it. Okay,
I know.
And of the 34 countries around the world that have recognized the Armenian genocide, including Argentina, Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Mexico, Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Russia, Sweden, U.S., Israel has not. Why not?
No idea. You'd have to ask them.
Don't you think that's a little weird?
I don't know. It's one of those facts you can pull out that I just don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah, I'm curious because to me it would be like, that part is it's not like if there's anybody that would be the first to, hey, we're the first. Listen, that's kind of weird. What just happened?
I
We don't support.
I think there's a load of weird stuff in the world. You can always pull something like that out.
That's
What are you driving at?
I'm Armenian. I'm driving it because I'm Armenian.
Right.
So to me, like we don't sit there and we say, the events didn't happen to the Jewish community. But if they're that happened, you're not supposed. By the way, I don't know if you saw what Erdogan said recently. Did you see what Erdogan said last week?
I follow him relatively closely because he's quite a close enemy.
So Erdogan, if you type in news, type in Erdogan and Israel. I think that's the one right there. The first story, Rob. Go, zoom in a little bit so we can read it. I can see all the stories. Erdogan seeks Islamic. That's the one. Erdogan seeks Islamic
alliance against Israel. Says its expansionism will
stop in
Gaza.
Right. So part of it, you'll hear some people make the argument the reason why Israel doesn't want to recognize the Armenian genocide is because they may lose an ally like Turkey. But Turkey is not necessarily the biggest ally to Israel, especially the position that they're taking. I don't think Erdogan wakes up in the morning saying, I wonder how safe Israel is.
No, I mean, Erdogan is a deep opponent of Israel, of course.
For sure it is.
But what's your point? So,
I just think if the Israeli community is seeing what's happening, they know what history is, and they're seeing what Turkey and Azerbaijan was doing to Armenia.
oh, yeah, sure.
Why wouldn't they come out and say, hey, we don't support this and we also recognize the Armenian genocide?
A central theme in Douglas Murray's warning is the deepening erosion of European cultural identity. He argues that for decades, Europe has drifted away from the very traditions and values that once unified it, from classical liberalism to a shared sense of heritage. According to Murray, this loss of historical consciousness and pride has created a cultural vacuum, one easily filled by divisive ideologies and imported belief systems. Without a clear understanding of who they are, European societies are now more susceptible to both internal disintegration and external pressures. He emphasizes that identity isn't just symbolic, it's functional. It shapes how nations respond to crises, protect freedoms, and maintain societal cohesion. And without it, Murray suggests, Europe risks becoming unrecognizable, even to its own citizens.
So right now,
What's my position with war?
let me explain what I mean by that. So right now, like with the Middle East, okay, so you got elections, you got Trump, you got Kamala, you got all this stuff that's going on right now. And, some people are saying, hey, man, we got to see Trump gets elected, Ukraine, Russia's going to be done, everything going on with Israel and Palestine, Gaza, he's going to stop that overnight, And then from there, let's not get involved in businesses we have nothing to do. What's your position with that? What position should America take with everything that's going on in the Middle East?
Well, I'd say it's another of the trenches that is available for us to fall into, which is the temptation to retreat from the world. America is the most important country in the world by an incredibly long way. Not just financially, not just militarily, culturally, in terms of ideology, in terms of the spread of the ideas that come from America. I see no scenario in which America can retreat from the world as it is and for the world to remain as it is. And I know, because people I know on the American right as well as on the American left, always at the risk of falling into the temptation of American withdrawal from the world. And I always have the same thing, which is, has America made mistakes? Of course. Has it got involved in things it couldn't deal with? Afghanistan? Absolutely. But that is not an argument for America stepping back. Because although America should be judicious in where it steps in the world, if it has no involvement in the world, other people will. And if America doesn't want to be the dominant power on the world stage, then it will have to cede the terrain to China or the Communist Party of China or whoever else. I'm interested, by the way, particularly on the right, I'm interested in this fall into the isolationism at the moment, because it's very interesting that those people want America still to be the foremost country in the world, but don't want to be involved in the world. Interesting, that.
Don't want to be involved in every war.
No. America is not involved in every war. Plenty of stuff. I mean, what's America doing in Myanmar?
We're involved in the main ones. Whether it's funding, money, it's
Depends
resources.
what you see as the main ones. I mean,
what are the two main ones right now? The
two ones that have the most attention is different.
What's costing more than those two?
Well, the Syrian civil war that's lasted the last decade is costing far more lives.
I'm talking.
Hang on.
I'm talking like 2 years.
The Syrian civil war has gone on for more than a decade now.
Right.
More people have been killed in that than have been killed in every single war involving Israel and all of the Arab armies in the last 80 years. So it does seem actually that people's attention is sometimes very clearly on certain issues.
So why do you think that is?
A range of things. In the case of, I covered the Ukraine war. I was embedded with the Ukrainian armed forces when they were retaking Kherson or Mykolaiv from the Russians. And so I've seen quite a lot of that war up close. That one is a very straightforward one. I don't believe that Ukraine is part of Europe.
Murray doesn't mince words when addressing the failures of European leadership. He argues that much of the continent's decline stems from those in power, leaders who prioritize political correctness and short-term optics over long-term strategy. Instead of addressing root causes, many leaders, Murray suggests, have resorted to appeasement and performative gestures, often avoiding the difficult conversations needed to safeguard national interests. This lack of decisive, courageous leadership, he claims, has allowed cultural tensions to fester and institutional trust to crumble. For Murray, the path forward requires leaders who not only recognize the scale of the crisis but are willing to take bold, sometimes unpopular actions to restore stability, identity, and vision for Europe's future.
If you go to the Baltic states, as I did again, 18 months ago, I suppose, a year ago, if you go to the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and so on, they are really worried about Russia. Really worried. They have, enlistment and so on. If you go to the Central and Eastern Europe, simply the further east you go across Europe, the more you find a genuine concern about this. If Vladimir Putin had succeeded in making it all the way to Kiev in 2022, Europe would be shaking in its boots even more than it currently is. It would have, and it would have been an unbelievable destabilizing effect on the world. It's not the case, as some people pretend, that Vladimir Putin is only interested in Ukraine. I know that because I've been to the country, not the state, the country of Georgia when he tried to invade that, 2008. So the idea that Putin simply has Ukraine in his sights is not true. And should we get into World War III over this? Obviously not.
We're flirting with it.
Not. I hope not. But should he be allowed to gobble up nations, whatever you think of them, by the way, and then this is a point at which a lot of people on the right will say, well, Ukraine is so corrupt and this and that and that. Let's say if I agreed with all of that, nevertheless, not good for world stability to allow Russia to invade nation states, particularly ones whose security that we had agreed to, whose borders we'd agreed to secure. I mean, that was part of the deal that Britain was involved in as well with the handing over the nukes in the 90s. So Ukraine is a war that is deeply troubling Europe and NATO, and therefore America does have interests in that.
So you're for that war? You're for the money and the funding that we're giving to that war?
We could go into all sorts of the details of it. I have criticisms around the edges about the way in which the funding has happened, the way in which the arming has happened, the training and so on. But to date, Vladimir Putin has not been able to overrun all of Ukraine, and I think that's a good thing. And this has happened, by the way, with American funding, but no American troops. And if people don't like the idea of American troops on the ground around the world in order to secure world peace and the global order of nation states, if people don't like the idea of American troops being on the ground, what else have you got available than helping and arming other countries' troops who are willing to fight for their own country? That's the only other options. Unless you want, as I say, to just step back. Vladimir Putin wants it, he can have it. And the Hamas war has gained the world's attention because every war involving Israel always does gain the world's attention. And maybe it's because of what we were discussing before about disproportionate attention towards the tiny percentage of the world's population that's Jewish. I mean, I can't help thinking that is the case because, as I say, I just notice in country after country people being massacred and nobody gives a damn. I mean, I've seen the massacre of Christians in the countries, in the Arab countries, and the destruction of the Christian communities in Iraq, for instance, destruction of the Christian communities in the north of Nigeria. The world is not focused day in, day out on these stories. As the old thing goes, if it's Jews, it's news. The world is obsessed with the question of Israel, and there are lots of reasons for that. And this past year, I spent a lot of the time in Israel and Gaza. The world seems to have gone crazy over this conflict.
One of Murray's most urgent warnings revolves around the cost of silence. He contends that many across Europe see the problems unfolding: rising crime, social unrest, the erosion of tradition, but remain silent out of fear of being labeled intolerant or politically incorrect. This culture of self-censorship, Murray argues, is just as dangerous as the challenges themselves. When honest discourse is stifled, the public loses faith in both media and political institutions. And in that vacuum, extremism often finds fertile ground. To Murray, silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. The longer these conversations are avoided, the more Europe risks losing not only its voice, but its very foundation.
You think they're going to give a shit? Like, you think they're going to react because they're going to be like, I'm getting money from, China. I'm getting money from Russia. You're not going to be able to do anything to Iran. You think Iran will react and stop with their proxies?
It has rather reacted recently. I mean, if you send hundreds of missiles and munitions that are directly from Iran into Israel, that is kind of intolerable, don't you think?
I do. No, what I'm saying is, you think Iran is at a point right now that they feel if Russia and China have their backs,
well, there's a
they're
big if.
capable of. Well, I mean, I think the first thing's got to go is if Trump's got a great relationship with Putin and he reacts to Trump, Putin cannot empower, Iran. And if Trump comes in and the tariffs go and he starts challenging them with the Mexico tariffs, with the cars coming up here from, Hafyusan, the big plant that they built in Mexico, and they're saving all this money where per hourly labor they're paying in China $4.75. I think Hafyusan in Mexico is $3.95. They're saving money on workers in Mexico. So if Trump goes like this to Russia and China, then Iran has no power. If he does that. And if there's anybody capable of doing that, it's him.
Yeah, no, that's what I think. I mean, I think in any case, if I was the Iranians, I'd be very worried about throwing myself into the arms of the Chinese Communist Party and indeed Vladimir Putin, who are after their own interests. But just going back to this quickly, I mean, it is, I mean, this obsession with the Israel-Hamas war in the last year, it's terrible because October 7th was unbelievable. And Hamas, has this trap that it tries to catch Israel into every time, which is, come in and kill our people in order that we can call for the world's attention to be on you as the aggressor. And the world falls for it every time. The intercepted messages the Wall Street Journal ran the other week from Sinwar, the architect of the 7th, who's the Hamas leader now in Gaza. The phrases, the intercepted messages of his, where he talks about how good it is that there are so many casualties in the Gazan population because the Israelis are being blamed for it. Every casualty, in my view, is on Hamas because you're not allowed to start a war and then moan when you lose it. And every casualty is on Hamas because they could have given back the hostages or not taken them in the first place. The world is very unempathetic when anything happens to Israel, in my view. I remember when I think it's something like a belief on the right as well as parts of the right as well as parts of the left. There's something like a belief that Israel did something that justifies this. I think that's the sort of root of the problem. And I remember after 9/11, there was an academic in the UK called Mary Beard, the classicist, who said in the London Review of Books that, bad as 9/11 was, it was hard to get out of your head the fact that America had it coming. That was a huge scandal at the time, because most of us were like, how dare you? Like, even if America had done every single thing that her enemies accused her of, how dare you say that America had the killing of 3,000 civilians in one day coming? Well, I'm as intolerant of that attitude towards the state of Israel as I am towards the Republic here. I think it's a reprehensible attitude. And as for all of the self-taught people who've suddenly mugged up on tiny, tiny corners of Middle Eastern history in the last 11 months, I have yet to find somebody who's to persuade me that if, for instance, thousands and thousands of Americans have been killed on one day and thousands of Americans by proportion of population taken kidnapped, that America would not be tearing up the earth to get them back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's...
and that, by the way, it would have the right to do so, and that its friends and allies should expect it to do so.
Yeah, I understand everybody. I understand everybody's arguments on the side of defending yourself, obviously. I understand those who have family in Palestine, and they're sitting there saying, hey, I'm not for this. You're going to think your family first. I'm fully against any of the proxies that Iran funds. As a guy that lived there and witnessed what the Hezbollahs did, living there where your women in your family are frightened of walking outside because you may get, whipped 77 times in your back for showing a little bit of hair or a little bit of this. Those stories are endless. And I'm for 100% America first being the greatest country in the world, and we got to do our best to make sure we keep it that way. And some of the stuff that's happening right now with us being confused doesn't make me... It concerns me a little bit, but I'm an optimist. I'm a guy that believes future looks bright. I believe the right people will rise up. I think the right people are finding each other. I think we're going in the right direction. I'm always going to be in that state of mind. It's always been more beneficial to be 51% optimistic and thinking the future looks bright, and 49% being paranoid, that only the paranoid survive. and flirting with that mindset is a little bit confusing at times, because sometimes you go too much this way, too much that way, both way, but I'm always going to be more optimistic than anything else.
Douglas Murray's sobering outlook on Europe isn't just a commentary, it's a call to action. His argument that Europe is unraveling faster than anyone predicted challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about leadership, identity, and the dangers of cultural silence. Whether one agrees with all his conclusions or not, Murray forces a deeper reflection on where Europe stands and where it's heading. In a time of rapid change and growing polarization, his voice cuts through with urgency, a reminder that if these conversations aren't had now, it may soon be too late.